The old practice room smelled of wood polish and years of musical dreams. Eliza Chen sat alone at the grand piano, her fingers hovering over the keys as the last rays of evening sun streamed through the tall windows. The music building had nearly emptied for the night, just how she liked it. No one to hear her mistakes, no one to compare her to her famous family. Eliza took a deep breath and began to play. The notes of Chopin's nocturne flowed perfectly from her fingers, every rhythm exact, every dynamic shift precisely as written in the score. Yet something was missing, and she knew it. The music was correct but lifeless, like a beautiful painting viewed through foggy glass. She stopped abruptly, letting her hands fall into her lap. 20 years old and still unable to play with the spark that made people truly listen. What was the point of all those childhood hours spent practicing while other kids played outside? Growing up as the youngest, Chen had meant living in a household where excellence wasn't celebrated. It was expected. Her father, Lin Chen, conducted the San Francisco Symphony with a perfectionist's attention to detail. Her mother, May, had once toured the world as a violinist before settling into teaching at the conservatory. And then there was her brother, Thomas, the golden child who could play Rachmaninoff concertos by age 12. "You're improving," they would tell her after family performances, the faint praise carrying the weight of unspoken disappointment. The clock on the practice room wall ticked past 9 p.m. Eliza should have headed back to her dorm, but instead she started the piece again. Maybe this time the music would finally sound the way it felt in her head. The next morning, Professor Rivera handed back their music theory assignments. "Excellent analysis, Eliza," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your understanding of the technical aspects is impeccable. Technical aspects. Always the technical aspects. Never the heart." "Thanks," Eliza mumbled, tucking the paper into her folder. Her classmate Dion leaned over. "Another perfect score? Some of us have to actually struggle, you know." His tone was light, but Eliza heard the edge beneath it. Being a Chen opened doors, but it also invited resentment. "Trust me, I struggle plenty," she replied, gathering her books. Dion rolled his eyes. "Right. That's why you're at the top of the class." But test scores in music theory weren't the same as making an audience feel something. Eliza knew the difference, even if no one else seemed to. The announcement came during their afternoon master class. Professor Williams cleared his throat, silencing the room of 20 students. "I have exciting news. Next week we'll be honored with a visit from Anton Volkov." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Even Eliza felt a flutter of nervous excitement. Volkov was legendary. A Russian pianist whose recordings sold millions and whose concerts sold out within minutes of tickets going on sale. He was also known for his brutal honesty with young musicians. He'll be conducting a special master class, and 3 students will be selected to perform for his critique, Professor Williams continued. "This is an incredible opportunity." Later that day, Eliza sat in the campus coffee shop, laptop open to videos of Volkov's performances. His playing was nothing short of magical. The way he could make a simple melody line seem to float above the accompaniment, the way he built tension across long musical phrases. "Watching the competition?" a voice asked. Eliza looked up to see Lily, one of the few students who had been genuinely friendly since Eliza transferred to Eastman 6 months ago. "Just trying to understand what makes him special," Eliza replied. Making room at her table, Lily sat down with her chai latte. "Are you going to play for him?" "Professor Rivera suggested I should try." Eliza closed the laptop. "I don't think I'm ready. That's just nerves talking. Everyone knows you're technically flawless." There it was again. Technically flawless. The praise that wasn't really praise. "Being flawless isn't enough," Eliza said quietly. Lily studied her face. "You know, for someone from such an accomplished family, you have the worst case of imposter syndrome I've ever seen." Maybe it was imposter syndrome. Or maybe it was the crushing awareness that she hadn't inherited whatever magical gene allowed the rest of her family to move audiences to tears. That night, Eliza called home, something she rarely did in the middle of the week. Her grandmother answered. "Eliza, what a lovely surprise." Just hearing Grandmother Ying's voice eased some of the tension in Eliza's shoulders. Unlike the rest of the family, Grandmother never expected perfection. A composer who had created beautiful music in rural China during difficult times, she understood that art came from somewhere deeper than technique. "They're bringing in Anton Volkov for a master class," Eliza explained after they'd caught up. Professor Rivera wants me to play for him. Volkov. I heard him in Beijing many years ago. He plays from his soul. That's the problem, grandmother. I don't know if I have that in me. The line went quiet for a moment. Eliza, do you remember the story I told you about the cricket? Eliza smiled despite herself. The one that sang outside your window when you were a girl? Yes, everyone in the village thought crickets all sounded the same, but I could tell this one was different. It sang with just one tone, but somehow that tone contained everything. Happiness, longing, the changing seasons. I wrote my first composition trying to capture what I heard in that single note. I remember, Eliza said softly. Music isn't about playing all the right notes, dear one. It's about finding the one note that matters most and giving it your truth. After they hung up, Eliza thought about her grandmother's words. Finding the one note that matters. It sounded simple, yet it had eluded her for years. The next day, the list was posted for the Volkov masterclass. Eliza's name was at the top, followed by Dion and a third-year student named Harriet who specialized in contemporary music. Congratulations, Professor Rivera said, finding Eliza staring at the list. This is your chance to show everyone what you can do. Pressure coiled in Eliza's stomach. What if I'm not ready? You've been playing Chopin's Ballet No. 1 for months. The technical aspects are perfect, there it was again. The technical aspects. I'll work on it, Eliza promised. For the next 5 days, Eliza practically lived in the practice rooms. She played the ballade over and over, trying to find whatever was missing. She recorded herself, listened back, adjusted, tried again. Nothing changed. The notes were right, but the music remained stubbornly behind glass. The morning of Volkov's visit arrived with a light dusting of spring snow. The recital hall buzzed with excitement as students and faculty gathered. Eliza peeked through the stage door and saw him in the front row, Anton Volkov with his shock of silver hair and intense eyes reviewing the program notes. Backstage, Eliza's hands trembled. She tried her breathing exercises, but nothing calmed the storm in her mind. You look like you're about to face a firing squad, Dion said, adjusting his tie. The competitive edge in his voice had softened to genuine concern. Maybe I am, Eliza replied. Hey, you're a Chen. Music is in your blood. If only it were that simple. If only excellence could be inherited as easily as eye color or height. Professor Williams appeared. Eliza, you're up first. Ready? No, she wanted to say. I'll never be ready. Instead, she nodded and followed him to the stage. The walk to the piano felt endless. The bench was too high, then too low when she adjusted it. The light seemed overly bright. She could feel Volkov's eyes on her, assessing before she'd played a single note. Eliza placed her hands on the keys and began the opening measures of the ballade. The familiar notes flowed from her fingers just as they had in countless practice sessions. Technically perfect, emotionally vacant. Halfway through, she risked a glance at Volkov. His expression was unreadable, his posture rigid. Was that disappointment she saw? Or just concentration? Eliza returned her focus to the piano, trying to recall her grandmother's words about finding the one note that mattered. But all she could hear was the mechanical precision of her playing, each perfect note falling like a tiny dead weight into the silent hall. When she finished, the applause was polite, but brief. Eliza remained seated at the piano, waiting for Volkov's critique, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Volkov took his time, making a note in his program before looking up at her with those piercing eyes. Miss Chen, he began, his Russian accent thick but his English precise. Your playing is... Eliza held her breath. A small, unexpected laugh escaped him, sending a chill down her spine. What happened next would change everything. Your playing is like a well-programmed computer, Volkov said, his laugh fading into a disappointed sigh. All the correct notes, perfect timing, flawless technique. But where is the human being behind the performance? The words hung in the air. Eliza sat frozen at the piano, her fingers still resting on the keys as if they might somehow redeem themselves. Perhaps, Volkov continued, leaning forward in his seat, you could find work recording demonstration pieces for music students. Your technical precision would serve well there. Someone in the back row coughed. The sound echoed through the painfully silent hall. But as for moving an audience, Volkov shook his head slowly. Some people simply aren't meant for music. They lack the essential thing that cannot be taught. Heat crawled up Eliza's neck and into her cheeks. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor or dissolve into. Oh, the air, anywhere but here, pinned under the pitying stares of her classmates and professors. Professor Williams stepped forward awkwardly. Thank you for your, candid feedback, Mr. Volkov. Perhaps we could discuss specific areas for improvement. Improvement? Volkov interrupted. You misunderstand me. I do not criticize her technique. It is perfect like a music box, but a music box cannot make you cry. He gestured toward Eliza, who still hadn't moved. She has built a perfect cage of notes with nothing living inside. Somehow Eliza managed to stand. Her legs felt disconnected from her body as she bowed stiffly and walked off the stage. Each step took tremendous effort, as if she were moving underwater. Behind her, she heard Williams announcing Dion as the next performer. In the hallway outside the recital hall, Eliza pressed her back against the wall and tried to breathe. Her grandmother's words echoed mockingly in her mind, finding the one note that matters. What a foolish idea. She didn't have it in her. Volkov had confirmed what she'd always feared. She was technically skilled but fundamentally hollow. Eliza, she looked up to see Professor Rivera approaching cautiously, concern etched on her face. He was unnecessarily harsh, Rivera said. Volkov is known for his dramatic assessments. He was honest, Eliza replied, her voice surprisingly steady. Everyone's been thinking it. He just said it out loud. Rivera placed a hand on her shoulder. That's not true. Your playing has tremendous potential. Please don't. Eliza stepped away from the touch. I've heard about my potential my whole life. I'm tired of it. She walked away before Rivera could respond, heading outside into the cold spring air. The light snow from that morning was melting, leaving the campus paths slick and shiny. Eliza didn't care. She walked blindly, no destination in mind except away. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably Rivera or maybe Lily checking on her. She ignored it. Eventually, she found herself at the small campus lake. In warmer weather, students gathered here to study or relax, but today it was deserted. Eliza sat on a damp bench and finally let the tears come. They weren't dramatic sobs, just quiet, steady tears that matched the slow dripping of melting snow from the trees. Her phone buzzed again. And again. Finally, she pulled it out. 3 missed calls from her brother Thomas. A text message. Just heard about the Volkov disaster. Call me, of course. News traveled fast in music circles. By tomorrow, everyone in the classical music world would know how Anton Volkov had laughed at Lin Chen's daughter. She turned off her phone. The sun was setting by the time Eliza returned to her dorm room. Her roommate Beth looked up from her desk with wide eyes. There you are. Everyone's been looking for you. I needed some time alone, Eliza said, dropping her bag and coat on her bed. Professor Rivera came by twice. And Lily's been texting me nonstop. Beth hesitated. Is it true what they're saying? About Volkov? Probably. Eliza didn't have the energy to ask what specific version of the story was circulating. What a jerk, Beth said firmly. Who does he think he is? One of the greatest pianists alive, Eliza answered flatly. That's who he is. Still, he didn't have to be so mean about it. Eliza sank onto her bed. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I just want to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. Eliza lay awake, replaying Volkov's words over and over. A well-programmed computer, a perfect cage of notes with nothing living inside. The worst part was that she couldn't even disagree with him. She'd known something was missing from her playing. She just hadn't expected to be called out so publicly, so cruelly. By morning, Eliza had made a decision. She skipped her classes and went straight to the administration office to pick up withdrawal forms. If she acted quickly, she could leave before the end of the semester. She could tell her family she needed time to reconsider her path. Maybe she could switch to music education or arts administration, something that wouldn't require her to perform. The older woman at the front desk handed over the forms with a sympathetic smile. Are you sure about this, dear? It's almost the end of term. I'm sure, Eliza said. She spent the day filling out paperwork and avoiding everyone she knew. It wasn't difficult. Most people seemed to be giving her a wide berth anyway, unsure what to say after yesterday's humiliation. That evening, she forced herself to call her parents. Her mother answered, Eliza, we've been so worried. Thomas told us what happened. I'm fine, Eliza lied. Actually, I've been thinking about taking some time off. A pause. Because of what one man said? That doesn't sound like you. It's not just about him, Eliza insisted, though of course it was. I've been feeling uncertain about this path for a while. Another pause, longer this time. Your father wants to speak with you. Before Eliza could protest, her father's deep voice came through the phone. Eliza, this is disappointing news. Not, I'm sorry this happened, or how are you feeling? Just disappointment, typical. I know, Dad, I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't solve anything. The question is what you're going to do about it, Eliza sighed. That's why I'm calling. I'm thinking about taking a break. Absolutely not, her father cut in. Chens don't quit when things get difficult. I'm not quitting, I'm just, if you walk away now, you let this man define you. Is that what you want? Put that way, it did sound pathetic. But what was the alternative? Keep playing the way she always had, technically perfect but emotionally empty. I don't know what I want anymore, she admitted. Her father's voice softened slightly. Eliza, every musician faces criticism. Even harsh criticism. What matters is how you respond to it. How am I supposed to respond to being told I lack the essential thing that makes music worth listening to? By proving him wrong. After hanging up, Eliza sat at her desk staring at the half-completed withdrawal forms. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Prove him wrong, but how? She couldn't magically develop the emotional connection to music that had eluded her for 20 years. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Beth had gone to study in the library, so Eliza was alone. Who is it? She called. It's Lily. Please let me in. I've been worried sick. Eliza sighed and opened the door. Lily stood there holding a paper bag from the local bakery. I brought stress cookies, she said, wiggling the bag. Chocolate chunk. Despite everything, Eliza felt a small smile form. Thanks. They sat on Eliza's bed, sharing cookies in silence for a few minutes before Lily spoke. So what now? Eliza glanced at the withdrawal forms on her desk. I don't know. Lily followed her gaze and frowned. You're not seriously leaving, are you? I was considering it. Because of what that pretentious jerk said? Come on, Eliza. He wasn't wrong, Eliza said quietly. You've heard me play. You know there's something missing. Lily was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her words. I think maybe you're looking at this all wrong. What do you mean? Volkov said you play like a computer, right? All technique, no feeling? Eliza winced. Thanks for the reminder. No, listen. What if that's not because you can't feel the music, but because you're afraid to? The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. Afraid? Lily nodded eagerly. Think about it. You grew up with these incredible musicians who set impossible standards. You learned to play perfectly because mistakes weren't allowed. But showing emotion is messy. It's unpredictable. It's risky. Eliza stared at her friend. Could it really be that simple? Was she just afraid? So what do I do? She asked finally. I don't know exactly, Lily admitted. But I know hiding or running away isn't the answer. After Lily left, Eliza sat at her desk for a long time, thinking. Eventually, she picked up the withdrawal forms and slowly tore them in half, then in quarters. If she was going to prove Volkov wrong, prove everyone wrong, including herself, she needed to start by facing her fear. But how? Almost without conscious thought, she found herself walking to the music building. It was nearly midnight, but she knew the practice rooms would still be open. At this hour, she would have the place to herself. The familiar smell of wood polish and aging sheet music greeted her as she entered the building. She walked past the main practice rooms to the very end of the hall, where the oldest piano stood in a rarely used room. It was slightly out of tune in a way that gave it character, and something about its worn keys always felt more forgiving than the newer instruments. Eliza sat at the bench and placed her hands on the keys but didn't press down. Instead, she closed her eyes and remembered her grandmother's story about the cricket with its single, meaningful note. Find the one note that matters, she whispered to herself. Then, very gently, she pressed a single key, middle C. The note hung in the air, imperfect on the old piano but somehow more alive because of it. Eliza played the note again, trying to really listen this time. Not to her technique or to an imagined audience's reaction, but to the sound itself. The way it filled the small room, the way it faded, the tiny imperfections in its tone. For the first time in years, Eliza felt something stir inside her as she played. not fear of making a mistake, not anxiety about measuring up, but something else. Something that felt almost like curiosity. She played the note a third time, putting everything she had felt that day into it. The humiliation, the despair, the anger, the tiny flicker of defiance. The note sounded exactly the same to anyone who might have been listening, but to Eliza it contained worlds. For the next week, Eliza barely attended classes. Her professors sent concerned emails which she read but didn't answer. Lily left voicemails checking on her. Even Dayon, who had performed brilliantly for Volkov and received glowing praise, texted to see if she was okay. Eliza wasn't avoiding people out of shame anymore. She was too busy. Every night she returned to the old practice room with the slightly out-of-tune piano. She started with that single middle C, playing it over and over, trying to pour different emotions into it. Anger made her press harder, joy made her touch lighter. She experimented with the pedal, listening to how it changed the note's character and decay. Then she tried a G, then an E-flat. Each note became a world to explore. After 3 days of this strange practice, Eliza remembered something else her grandmother had told her years ago. The space between the notes is as important as the notes themselves. At the time, young Eliza hadn't understood. Now she began to see. She played C again, but this time focused on the moment before her finger touched the key. The anticipation, the breath. Then she focused on the moment after the sound began to fade. The lingering, the memory of the note. On the 5th night, Eliza brought a small notebook and began writing observations. C played with anger feels like a door slamming. Key played with sadness feels like a sigh. The same exact note. How is this possible? On the 6th night, she tried something new. She played C while thinking about Volkov's laughter. The note came out brittle and harsh. Then she played it while thinking about her grandmother's hands, wrinkled and strong, showing her how to position her fingers on the keys when she was 5 years old. The exact same note somehow sounded warm and rich. It's not just about emotion, she whispered to herself. It's about memory, history, story. By the end of the week, Eliza had filled half the notebook with her observations. She hadn't played a single piece of music, just individual notes, sometimes pairs of notes, exploring the infinite ways they could sound depending on how she approached them. On the 8th day, Professor Rivera cornered her after theory class. You've missed 3 lessons, she said, her face tight with concern. This isn't like you, Eliza. I know. I'm sorry, Eliza replied. I've been working on something. Working on what? Your withdrawal? Because the office tells me you never submitted the forms. No, not that. Eliza hesitated, unsure how to explain what she'd been doing. It would sound crazy to say she'd spent a week playing single notes. I'm trying a new approach to playing. Rivera's expression softened slightly. I'm glad to hear you haven't given up, but you need to keep up with your classes. The spring recital is in 3 weeks and you're expected to perform. The spring recital. Eliza had forgotten all about it. Every student was required to perform, and many used it as an opportunity to show off their most technically challenging pieces. In previous years, Eliza had done the same, choosing difficult works that demonstrated her precision and skill. I'll be ready, she promised, though she had no idea what she would play. That night, Eliza called her grandmother. When Ying answered, the familiar voice brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes. Grandmother, I've been thinking about what you said, about the cricket and the single note. Have you now? Her grandmother sounded pleased. And what have you discovered? That maybe you were right. I've been spending time just exploring individual notes and it's opening something in me. Tell me more, her grandmother encouraged. Eliza described her experiments, feeling slightly foolish as she explained how she'd spent hours on single notes, but her grandmother made small sounds of understanding and approval. I remember when I first realized this, Ying said when Eliza finished. I was your age, maybe a bit younger. It changed everything for me. But how do I take this feeling and apply it to actual music? To a whole piece? Her grandmother chuckled. You're still thinking like a technician, dear one. As if this is a method to be applied. It's not. It's a way of being with the music I don't understand. You will. Keep following this path. Trust yourself. After hanging up, Eliza sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She navigated to the music school's database of scores and began searching, not for the usual showcase pieces, but for something different. something that might allow her to use what she was discovering. Her search led her to an obscure collection of Chinese piano compositions from the mid-20th century. Among them was a piece titled Single Thread Through Silk by a composer she'd never heard of, Ying Chen, her grandmother. Eliza stared at the screen in disbelief. She knew her grandmother had composed music, but she'd never seen any of it published or performed. With trembling fingers, she downloaded the score and printed it out. The piece was unlike anything she'd seen before. Instead of the usual complex arrangements of notes, it was built around variations of a single recurring note, F sharp. The variations came through subtle changes in timing, dynamics, and the notes that occasionally accompanied the F sharp. Reading through it, Eliza could almost hear her grandmother's voice explaining the cricket song. The next morning, Eliza arrived early for her lesson with Professor Rivera, the score clutched in her hand. "I'd like to play this for the spring recital," she said, placing the music on the piano. Rivera examined it with a furrowed brow. "I'm not familiar with this piece. Or this composer. She's my grandmother." Rivera's eyebrows rose. "I didn't know your grandmother was a composer." "Few people do. She wrote music during the Cultural Revolution in China, when it wasn't always safe to create art that didn't serve the state. Most of her work was never published. It's unusual," Rivera said, flipping through the pages. "Very minimalist. Are you sure this is what you want to play? The spring recital is an opportunity to demonstrate your skills." "I'm sure," Eliza said firmly. "This piece means something to me." Rivera studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. Let's hear what you've got so far." Eliza sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening F-sharp hung in the air, simple and unadorned. She played it the way she'd been practicing all week, focusing on the feeling behind it, in this case. The feeling of curiosity, of beginning a journey. As she continued, the piece revealed itself as a kind of musical meditation. The F-sharp remained the anchor, but it transformed as the piece progressed, surrounded at times by gentle harmonies, at times standing starkly alone. Eliza found herself becoming lost in it, forgetting that Rivera was listening, forgetting everything except the conversation she was having with this single, persistent note. When she finished, the silence in the room felt charged with something new. Eliza looked up to see Rivera staring at her with an expression of astonishment. Rivera seemed to be searching for words. "That was unlike anything I've ever heard you play before." "Is that good or bad?" Eliza asked, suddenly uncertain. "It's good. Very good." Rivera leaned forward. "Where has this been hiding, Eliza? This feeling, this presence in your playing?" Eliza looked down at her hands. "I think it was always there. I just didn't know how to access it." Over the next 2 weeks, Eliza worked with Rivera to refine her interpretation of her grandmother's piece. Unlike her previous lessons, which had focused on technical perfection, these sessions explored the emotional landscape of the music. They talked about intention, about the weight of a single note, about the courage it took to let a simple sound stand on its own without hiding behind technical flourishes. Word began to spread around the music school about Eliza's unusual choice for the recital. Some students were skeptical. "I heard she's just playing one note over and over," Dion told a group at lunch, loud enough for Eliza to hear from the next table. "Guess Volkov really got to her." Others were curious. Lily, who had been supportive from the beginning, asked if she could sit in on a practice session. "That was beautiful," she said afterward, her eyes wide. It's like you found your voice." As the recital approached, Eliza's old doubts began to resurface. What if everyone reacted like Dion? What if they thought she was taking the easy way out by playing such a technically simple piece? What if they laughed? The night before the recital, she couldn't sleep. She paced her dorm room until Beth threw a pillow at her and begged her to lie down. But rest wouldn't come. At 4 a.m., Eliza gave up and walked to the music building. The campus was eerily quiet, fog hanging low over the paths. She let herself into the old practice room and sat at the piano in the dark. Without turning on the lights, she began to play her grandmother's piece. In the darkness, with no one to watch or judge, she found herself going deeper into the music than ever before. Each note felt like a confession, a revelation. By the time she reached the final measures, tears were streaming down her face. This, she realized, was what had been missing all along. Not skill or technique or knowledge, but vulnerability. The willingness to put her true self into each note, even at the risk of being seen, being judged, being hurt. As dawn broke, Eliza walked back to her dorm with a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened at the recital, she had found something precious, something that was hers alone. That afternoon, as she waited backstage for her turn to perform, Eliza felt the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach. But underneath the nerves was something new, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, playing exactly what she needed to play. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage and sat at the grand piano. The hall was packed with students, faculty, and visitors. Somewhere in that crowd, her parents and brother were watching. They had flown in that morning, curious about her mysterious new piece. Eliza adjusted the bench, placed her hands in her lap, and took a deep breath. Then she looked up and froze. In the front row, watching her with those same intense eyes, sat Anton Volkov. Time seemed to stop as Eliza stared at Volkov. What was he doing here? The spring recital wasn't a major event outside the school. Had someone invited him specifically to witness her second humiliation? Her heart raced. Her hands, resting in her lap, began to tremble. All the calm certainty she'd felt earlier evaporated like morning dew. "Run," a voice inside her urged. "Just get up and walk off stage. Save yourself." But then she remembered her father's words. "If you walk away now, you let this man define you." She looked down at her hands. These were the same hands that had spent countless hours exploring single notes in the practice room, the same hands that had connected to something real inside her for the first time. Would she betray that discovery now, just because the man who had laughed at her was watching? Eliza closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought of her grandmother's story about the cricket. She thought of the notebook filled with her observations. She thought of the feelings she'd had at dawn, playing in the dark practice room with tears on her face. No, she would not run. She opened her eyes, nodded slightly to acknowledge Volkov's presence, and then looked away from him, focusing instead on the piano. This wasn't about him. It was about the music, about her journey with it. Eliza lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. Then she began to play. The opening F sharp hung in the air, clear and purposeful. Unlike every other performance she'd given, Eliza wasn't thinking about technique or audience reaction. She was thinking about the note itself, about what she wanted to say with it. As she continued into the piece, she entered a state of flow she'd never experienced before. The F sharp recurred throughout, sometimes supported by delicate harmonies, sometimes standing alone. Each time it appeared, Eliza gave it a slightly different character, questioning, then affirming, then yearning, then resolving. She was dimly aware of the audience's attention, the unusual stillness that had fallen over the hall. No coughing, no rustling of programs, no whispered comments, just collective listening. Halfway through, there was a passage where the F sharp appeared in the highest register of the piano, ethereal and distant. As Eliza played it, she felt a lump form in her throat. This note reminded her of her childhood, of watching her family perform and wondering if she would ever belong in their musical world. The emotion translated directly into her touch, making the note shimmer with vulnerability. When she reached the final section, where the F sharp returned to the middle register, and was joined by a simple, hymn-like progression of chords, Eliza felt tears threatening again. But these weren't tears of frustration or shame. They were tears of recognition, of homecoming. This was what music was supposed to feel like, not a performance to be judged, but a truth to be shared. The final F sharp faded away into silence. Eliza kept her hands on the keys, head bowed, allowing the last vibrations to dissipate completely before she released the pedal. For a moment, the silence continued. Then, from somewhere in the back of the hall, a single person began to clap. Others joined, the applause building until it filled the space that her music had just occupied. Eliza raised her head and stood, bowing as she'd been taught. She didn't look at Volkov. She didn't want to know his reaction yet. Instead, she sought out her family in the audience. Her mother was wiping away tears. Her father sat very straight, his expression unreadable but his eyes never leaving her face. Thomas was grinning and clapping loudly. As she left the stage, Eliza felt oddly calm. Whatever happened next, whether Volkov had been moved or remained unimpressed, she knew she had played truthfully for the first time in her life. No one could take that away from her. Backstage, Professor Rivera was waiting with shining eyes. Eliza, that was... I don't even have words. Thank you, Eliza said simply, for believing in me, for letting me try something different. I've never heard that piece played with such presence, Rivera continued. Your grandmother would be proud. The mention of her grandmother made Eliza smile. She knew all along what I was missing. I just wasn't ready to hear it. Other students were gathering backstage, preparing for their performances or having just finished. Many looked at Eliza with new respect. Dion approached, seeming slightly awkward. That was really something, he said. Not what I expected. Coming from him, it was high praise. Eliza nodded her thanks. Lily rushed over and hugged her tightly. You were amazing. The way you made that one note sound like a whole universe of emotions. I've never heard anything like it. Neither have I, said a heavily accented voice behind them. Eliza turned to find Anton Volkov standing there, his silver hair gleaming under the backstage lights. Up close, he looked older than she remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper. Mr. Volkov, she managed, her heart racing again. I didn't expect to see you here. Professor Williams invited me to hear the spring performances, he said. A fortunate coincidence. An awkward silence fell. Lily squeezed Eliza's arm and whispered, I'll find you later, before discreetly retreating. Other students also drifted away, giving them privacy while obviously straining to overhear. Your piece, Volkov said finally. It was most unusual. Who composed it? My grandmother, Yingchen. His eyebrows rose slightly. I am not familiar with her work. Most people aren't. She composed in private during difficult times in China. Volkov nodded thoughtfully. And what made you choose this particular piece? It is not the typical showcase for a conservatory student. Eliza considered her answer carefully. After your master class, I realized something was missing from my playing. I spent time exploring just single notes, trying to find, I'm not sure what. A connection, maybe. And then I discovered this piece of my grandmother's that seemed to be about exactly that. The universe inside a single note. Volkov studied her face as if searching for something. When I heard you the first time, I thought, here is someone who has never truly listened to herself play. Today I heard someone who listens deeply. He paused. It is a remarkable transformation in such a short time. Eliza wasn't sure how to respond. Was this praise? An apology? Neither? Thank you, she said finally. Your comments at the master class, they were painful to hear, but they pushed me to look for something more in my playing. Volkov waved a hand dismissively. I am known for being harsh, sometimes too harsh, but I recognize genuine talent when I hear it, even if it takes different forms than expected. He leaned closer. Your technical playing before was like perfectly arranged flowers, beautiful but dead. Today you played one living bud, and it contained more beauty than an entire garden of dead blossoms. From him, it was extraordinary praise. Eliza felt a weight she hadn't known she was carrying lift from her shoulders. There is an international piano competition in Prague next month, Volkov continued, surprising her with the change of subject. Unconventional interpretations and rarely performed works are welcomed there. You should consider entering. Prague? But that's one of the most prestigious competitions in Europe, yes. The deadline for applications is next week. He reached into his pocket and handed her a card. Email this address. Tell them I suggested you apply. They will make an exception on the deadline. Before Eliza could respond, Volkov turned at the sound of his name being called. Professor Williams was approaching with a group of faculty members, all eager to speak with the famous pianist. Think about it, Volkov said quietly to Eliza. You have found your voice. Now let the world hear it. Then he turned to greet the approaching professors. Eliza stood there, clutching his card, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Prague, an international competition? It seemed impossible. As the next student took the stage, Eliza slipped out a side door, needing fresh air and quiet to process what had just happened. Outside, the spring afternoon was mild, the campus quad dotted with blooming trees. She sat on a bench, turning Volkov's card over in her hands. Just weeks ago, this man had laughed at her playing, had suggested she record demonstration pieces because she lacked the essential thing that made music worth hearing. Now he was recommending her for an international competition. Eliza. She looked up to see her family approaching. her mother, father, and brother together. "There you are," her mother said, embracing her. "We've been looking everywhere for you. That performance was breathtaking, sweetheart." "Thanks, Mom." Eliza hugged her back, surprised at the emotion in her mother's voice. Her father stood a few steps away, his posture as rigid as ever, but his eyes were soft. "Your grandmother's piece," he said. "I haven't heard it played since she performed it herself many years ago." "You knew the piece?" Eliza asked, surprised. He nodded. "Of course. It was how I first met your mother, at a small concert in Beijing where your grandmother played. I never understood the piece until today. It was perhaps the most personal thing her father had ever shared with her." Eliza felt tears threatening again. Thomas punched her arm lightly. "Way to upstage all of us, little sister. Playing some weird minimalist piece and getting Volkov himself to come backstage. What did he say to you?" "Everyone's talking about it." Eliza looked down at the card in her hand. He suggested I apply for a competition." "In Prague?" Her father's eyebrows shot up. "The Prague International?" She nodded. "That's..." For once her father seemed at a loss for words. "That's a significant opportunity." "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," Eliza admitted. "It's so far away and I've only just started to find my way with this new approach." Her mother took her hand. "What does your heart tell you?" Eliza closed her eyes and listened inward, the way she'd learned to listen to a single note. What did she really want? "I want to keep exploring this path," she said finally. "I want to see where it leads, but I'm scared." "Being scared is normal," her father said, surprising her. "Every important journey begins with fear. The question is whether the fear will stop you." Eliza looked at her family, her mother's encouraging smile, her father's steady gaze, her brother's barely contained excitement. Then she thought of her grandmother, composing music in secret during dangerous times, finding beauty in the song of a cricket when the world around her was in chaos. She looked down at Volkov's card once more, then tucked it carefully into her pocket. "I think," she said slowly, "I need to talk to grandmother about Prague." The Rudolfinum Concert Hall in Prague was older and grander than any place Eliza had ever performed. Built in the 19th century, its neo-Renaissance architecture featured soaring ceilings, ornate moldings, and perfect acoustics. As Eliza stood backstage waiting for her turn in the final round of the competition, she ran her fingers over the smooth wooden wall, trying to draw strength from the building itself, a place where music had lived and breathed for generations. 10 minutes. "Miss Chen," a stagehand informed her quietly. Eliza nodded, smoothing her simple black dress. The past month had been a whirlwind. After speaking with her grandmother, who had been overjoyed about the Prague opportunity, Eliza had submitted her application with Volkov's recommendation. To her surprise, she'd been accepted as a late entry. Professor Rivera had worked with her intensively, helping her prepare not only her grandmother's piece, but also the required classical selections for the earlier rounds. Eliza had approached these familiar works differently now, bringing her new understanding to Mozart and Chopin. Her technical precision remained, but it now served the emotional heart of the music rather than substituting for it. Against all expectations, she had advanced through the preliminary rounds. Now she was one of 5 finalists, each permitted to play a piece of their choosing for the final performance. While the other finalists had selected virtuosic showpieces, Liszt, Rachmaninoff, Prokofiev, Eliza had stayed true to her grandmother's composition. The judges had raised eyebrows when she submitted her selection, but the rules permitted any piece and they had allowed it. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lily. "Watching the live stream. Whole school is gathered in the recital hall. You've got this." Attached was a photo of the Eastman Recital Hall packed with students and faculty, a projection screen showing the Prague competition stage. Eliza smiled, touched by their support. Another text came in, this one from her brother. "Mom, Dad, and I are in our seats." Dad actually looks nervous, which is a first. Her family had flown to Prague to support her, as had her grandmother, her first trip back to Europe since leaving China decades ago. Having them in the audience gave Eliza courage, but it also added pressure. What if her new approach failed her on this important stage? She closed her eyes and recalled her conversation with her grandmother the night before. "I'm afraid I'll let you down," Eliza had admitted as they sat in her grandmother's hotel room. Your piece deserves a better performer. Ying had taken Eliza's hands in her own. The piece was waiting for you, she said simply. All these years it was waiting for the right person to bring it to life. But what if I freeze? What if I can't find the connection when I'm out there in front of all those people? Her grandmother had smiled. Then play for me. Play for yourself. The audience will follow where you lead them if you believe in the path. Now, as the stagehand signaled that it was time, Eliza took a deep breath and walked onto the grand stage. The house lights had been dimmed, but she could still make out faces in the front rows. Her family sat together on one side. On the other, surprisingly, was Anton Volkov, who must have flown in for the finals. The 5 judges sat in a special box, their expressions carefully neutral. The Steinway concert grand waited at center stage, gleaming under the lights. Eliza took her place, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands in her lap. The hall fell silent. Nearly 1,000 people waiting to hear what this young American pianist would play. In that moment of silence, doubt crept in. What was she doing here? This wasn't a student recital or a local competition. This was Prague, one of the musical capitals of the world, and she was about to play a virtually unknown piece based around a single recurring note. It seemed suddenly presumptuous, even foolish. Eliza closed her eyes. She thought of the cricket outside her grandmother's childhood window in China. She thought of all those nights in the practice room exploring the universe inside single notes. She thought of Volkov's words, "You have found your voice. Now let the world hear it." She opened her eyes, lifted her hands, and began to play. The first F-sharp rang out clearly in the perfect acoustics of the hall. Eliza was surprised by how alive it sounded, how the note seemed to bloom and expand in the space. She played it again with slightly different emphasis. Beginning the journey of the piece, as she continued, she felt herself entering that same flow state she'd experienced at the school recital, but deeper now, more complete. The hall, the audience, the judges all faded from her awareness. There was only the piano, the note, and the story she was telling through it. In her grandmother's piece, the recurring F-sharp represented constancy amidst change, like a person standing firm while the world transformed around them. Each time it returned, it carried the memory of its previous appearances, creating a narrative that built on itself. When Eliza reached the middle section, where the note moved to the highest register, she thought of her grandmother as a young woman, composing in secret during turbulent times, finding beauty despite fear. She poured that understanding into her touch, making the high F-sharp sound like a distant star, small but inextinguishable. In the final section, where the simple chord progression joined the F-sharp, Eliza felt a sense of homecoming, of pieces falling into place. Her grandmother had written this music decades ago in a country across the world, yet somehow it had waited for Eliza to discover it, to complete its journey. The final note faded away. Eliza kept her hands on the keys, head bowed, allowing the silence to be part of the music. For several seconds, the hall remained absolutely still. Then, somewhere in the balcony, a person began to clap. Others joined, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence until the entire hall was filled with applause. Eliza rose and bowed, her eyes finding her grandmother in the audience. Ying was weeping openly, nodding at her granddaughter with fierce pride. Beside her, Eliza's parents were both on their feet. Even her father, who had always been sparing with praise, was applauding with uncharacteristic abandon. As Eliza left the stage, she felt oddly peaceful. Winning or losing the competition seemed suddenly less important than what had just happened between her, the music, and the audience. For those few minutes, they had all been connected through the journey of a single note. The remaining finalists performed brilliantly. A young Russian played Rachmaninoff with thundering passion. A South Korean pianist performed a Liszt rhapsody with dazzling technique. The French and German finalists were equally impressive with their Prokofiev and Brahms. When all 5 had performed, they were called back to the stage to await the judges' decision. Standing under the bright lights, Eliza felt a strange sense of detachment. Whatever happened next, she had already won something more valuable than any prize. The head judge, a famous German conductor, approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the jury has reached its decision for this year's Prague International Piano Competition." He began with the honorable mentions, and 5th place, awarded to the German pianist. 4th place went to the French competitor. The South Korean received 3rd. "Second place," the judge announced, goes to Dmitry Petrov of Russia. Eliza blinked in surprise. That meant... And first prize is awarded to Eliza Chen of the United States for her extraordinary interpretation of Single Thread Through Silk by Ying Chen. The audience erupted in applause. The other finalists turned to congratulate her, their faces showing genuine admiration mixed with professional disappointment. Eliza accepted the crystal trophy in a daze, barely here, ing the judges' praise about revolutionary approach and profound emotional depth. At the reception afterward, she was surrounded by well-wishers, critics, and representatives from recording companies. Her family stood nearby, her father fielding questions about this previously unknown composer Ying Chen with obvious pride. Volkov made his way through the crowd to Eliza's side. "I told you the world needed to hear your voice," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Though I admit I did not expect quite this result." "Neither did I," Eliza confessed. "I just wanted to play truthfully." "That is the secret most pianists never discover," he replied. "Technical perfection is common. Truth is rare." He glanced at the crowd of industry people waiting to speak with her. "Your life will change after tonight. Remember what brought you here." Later, when the reception was winding down, Eliza finally had a moment alone with her grandmother. They sat together in a quiet corner of the grand hall, away from the remaining guests. "I never thought I would hear my music played like that," Ying said softly. "It was as if you understood exactly what I was trying to say all those years ago." "I had a good teacher," Eliza replied, squeezing her grandmother's hand. Ying smiled. "You found your own way. I just pointed at the path. Did you ever imagine your music would be played here? That it would win an international competition?" Her grandmother laughed quietly. "When I wrote that piece, I was living in a small village with no electricity. The idea that it would be played in Prague someday would have seemed like a fantasy." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "But the cricket song was real. The feeling it gave me was real. I knew if I could capture that truth, it would matter to someone somewhere. Someday." "It matters to everyone who heard it tonight," Eliza said. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, grandmother and granddaughter united by music that had bridged time, distance, and culture. "What will you do now?" Ying finally asked. "They are offering recording contracts, concert tours." Eliza looked out at the beautiful old hall now nearly empty. "I'll play concerts, of course. And I want to record your other compositions, bring them to the world." She smiled. "But first I want to keep exploring this path we've found. There's so much more to discover about the space between the notes, about the stories we can tell through music." Her grandmother nodded, understanding perfectly. "One note contains the universe if you know how to listen." Outside the Rudolfinum, the lights of Prague twinkled along the Vltava River. Inside, a young pianist and her grandmother sat together, united by the profound truth they had both discovered, that sometimes the simplest things, a single cricket song, a single piano note, contain the deepest meaning of all.